And Dana, I'm going to toss things to you. Dana?
Great. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I am so happy to see such a great turnout tonight, and I thank you all for joining us. I'm Dana Playton. I'm president of New York State PTA, and I want to welcome you. It's my honor to welcome you here tonight to our webinar on this very important issue that continues to face our children, our communities, and our schools. We want to really thank sincerely our sponsoring partner, Thermo Fisher, for their work in all that they do to keep our schools safe. And let's have everyone on the panel briefly introduce themselves before we turn things back over to our executive director, who will be moderating tonight, Kyle Belakapitsky. Suzanne from Thermo Fisher, would you like to start, please?
Hi, Dana. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Suzanne Graham. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Strategy at Thermo Fisher Scientific, working on our asymptomatic testing solutions business. And I am pleased to be here with all of you and also to be partnering with the National PTA to spread awareness around testing in the school systems to keep our children in school and have more in-person learning days. That's what we're here to talk about today, what we've been talking about all year, and looking forward to taking questions from the group tonight on that topic.
Great, Suzanne, thank you. And again, thank you so much for all you do. Next up, I'll introduce Megan Zarkey. She is our education coordinator for New York State PTA.
Thank you, Dana. As Dana said, I'm Megan Zarkey. I am the education coordinator for the New York State PTA. I am a music educator down on Long Island of almost 20 years. This coming fall, it will be year 20. Can't believe that. I'm also the mother of 2 young children who are finishing 2nd grade and kindergarten. And I'm looking forward to tonight's conversation from both the teacher and the parent perspectives.
Thank you, Megan. And I know you'll add so much to our discussion tonight. As I said, my name is Dana. And not only am I president of New York State PTA, but I'm also a school-related professional in a kindergarten classroom. So I'll be sharing that perspective along with that of a parent. And I also just find it very ironic that I am stuck in solitary confinement in my bedroom. I'm in quarantine to keep my family safe because I have COVID. So, you know, it's hitting everyone. And, you know, it is what it is, but I'm just very thankful that I'm not as sick as I could have been. And maybe I'll learn something new. And I just can't wait to break free from this room. I'm tired of these 4 walls. So Kyle, with that said, I'm going to turn it over to you.
And thank you, Madam President. We're so excited to have this fantastic panel and real meaningful conversation tonight about COVID and why it's still important and why we still have to have these conversations. I mean, who would have thought 2 years plus 3 months, I guess, into the pandemic. I as well had COVID early on, November 2020. So I hear where you are, sister, right now. So I appreciate, again, Suzanne and Thermo Fisher and Chris from National PTA and her team are on here with us to really hear this conversation. We want to make sure that we get enough time for your questions. So we're so excited to have so many great school districts on and units and our PTA leaders on, so we can talk really with you with your questions. Again, we're going to use that chat box. You can put in questions anytime during this presentation and conversation, more than a conversation. Susan is going to be monitoring that with Bonnie and Sonia, so that's really, really exciting. We're going to jump right into questions. Dana, I'm going to start with you, put you right on the hard spot. So let's talk a little bit first about what really New York State PTA and PTA has done in the past 2 years with COVID. You know, this came on quickly. New York, we were hit, you know, soonest and hardest. Obviously, it fell to the rest of the country very soon thereafter. But, you know, we had, you know, our state was devastated, really devastated. And our schools obviously closed very quickly and stayed closed. And many of our schools stay closed through the next school year too. But what did New York State PTA do to mobilize very quickly to support our units and families? Talk to a little bit about that.
Well, right away, we got to work and we went to our region directors and our executive committee. We're fortunate on our executive committee to have a physician and a nurse who was really able to help us and guide our path as all of this was coming down the pike. And altogether, we just dug right in because we knew that we would have to support families and schools. And we right away went to put together a link on our website with all the latest and all the current information, which we continue to do. We monitor that on a regular basis so that all that information that's up there is all current, it's all relevant. We were one of, actually, I think the only education association in the state to be a part of the governor's Reopening Schools Council. Kyle represented us on that committee. She represented us very well. And I will tell you that not only did they hear what we as an association had to say, but they really listened. And I will also tell you that Kyle and I have conversations with the governor's office on not just a regular basis. I mean, sometimes it's every day, and sometimes it's like 5, 6, 10 times a day. So they really are paying attention. I've also had the opportunity to meet with the governor twice. And so, I found her very open to what we had to say, what our concerns were, especially when it came to masking. And so we're really pleased to see how far we've come and where we are now. We also were a part of the State Education Department Reopening Committee. Kyle, again, is constantly in contact with them, and along with her, we meet with Commissioner Rosa and all of her deputies. And again, the collaboration that we have formed with these agencies and, with these government top people in the government, they're second to none. And so the fact that they're listening to us and they're taking what we have to say and what we think into consideration, and not just into consideration, but actually fulfilling what our asks are. It's just incredible. We do have webinars on a regular basis, and many of you have participated in those. We do workshops, and we're constantly trying to educate ourselves and educate others, and we provide support for units. Our field staff is really terrific, and we have monthly calls with all the region directors, the field support coordinators. They're all led and facilitated by a designated officer, and conversations are constantly ongoing, and their input is what has been driving what we put on our website. So I would say that we're really doing our very, very best, and I think we're doing a great job of it. We're just trying to fulfill everybody's needs, answer everyone's questions, and be the most relevant resource that they can turn to.
And I think that's important as an association that, represents the parents and the families of our 2.6 million school children. We have to be informed. I know I start my day every day. I look at Department of Health data that they send us, and we look at reproduction values, and we look at unfortunate death rates, and we look at the county level rates. When we were at the height of COVID, we would go every day into our COVID reporting protocol or portal for school districts. We would actually look by school district what reproduction rates look like in school districts. So these are the things that your association is doing so we can really understand where we are in New York. Suzanne, I'm going to put you on the tough seat and throw you kind of right in. And I really appreciate you being here. And it's great that, I was speaking with some of your colleagues today that corporate responsibility and this work together partnership is so important, because we need people like you to help people like us keep our kids safe. And I know that's part of your mission at Thermo Fisher. But, right now, New York was dropping. We were down in 2 and 3% positivity rates. We were really excited. Now, yesterday's rates were 10 and 11% again. So we're seeing a bit of a spike as we see strains come and go. Dana is perfect proof. So she is, I'll put you on the spot, Dana, fully vaccinated and doubly boosted. And still was unfortunately had COVID. Now the good news is, because what we know in working with our medical professionals, generally, once you're vaccinated, that you have reasonably low symptoms, and maybe Dana would have been sicker. I know I was fortunate. I had not had a vaccine yet because the vaccine wasn't out when I had COVID, but I lucked out. I had low symptoms. We've had some very, very dear friends of ours and people on our governance team that have lost family members to this horrible virus. And we think about them every day when we talk about this conversation. So I'm going to put you on the spot. So why do we still need to test? And I guess that's the big question. And I might have just answered it looking at Dana. So this is a big conversation we have with our families, right? We have these test to stay things we're going to talk about in New York, and we have all these at-home tests, and we have PCR tests and antigen tests. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But why do we still need to test? Aren't we done? Like, we are so COVID over at this point. We've been wearing masks and we've been vaccinated. We have super high vaccine rates in New York. We're the best vaccinated state in all of the 50 states, New York. Woo woo. If you like vaccines, great. If you don't, that's okay too. But if you're vaccinated, we have high vaccine rates. But why do we still have to test? And some people don't get it. And I understand. And so what's the story there?
Yeah. COVID fatigue is a real thing, right? And so we all feel that, parents feel that, teachers feel that, even kids feel that. They are tired of the masks, they're tired of testing, but COVID is still here, right? We know that. Dana is proof of that. I myself have my own COVID story. You can imagine in the type of work that I do, I am also super safe and am triple vaccinated. So vaccinated and double boosted and always masked and test frequently. And I was at a conference 2 weeks ago giving a talk about the importance of COVID testing for attendees attending events. And I caught COVID in Las Vegas and had to be stranded in a hotel in Las Vegas for 9 days. So nothing could be worse, Dana. Better to be in your room than in the hotel in Las Vegas, trust me. And so, yes, it is, COVID is still a thing. As much as we have COVID fatigue and we want it to be done, and we are all tired of living the way we've been living, we still have to live with COVID. And I think, there's some specific nuances to children that we need to take into consideration as to why testing is more important for children in the school systems. Number one, they're in a congregate setting. So every day they are in a contained space with a group of other children close together. And while before COVID, we had infectious disease, we had the flu, we had colds, we had other respiratory viruses, and we did normal things like cough into our elbow or sneeze into our elbow and wash our hands, normal precautionary measures. With the introduction of COVID, we added things like masks and vaccination, mandatory vaccinations. And a lot of those things have started to go away. So likely in all of the schools that everyone on the call today have children attending, the masks have gone away, or at least not mandatory anymore. And that makes testing even more important. The virus spreads much faster when we have no masking. Of course, we have plenty of data to show that. We know that this is true. We also know children are highly under-vaccinated. So the 5 to 12-year-old age group, is much less vaccinated than the older groups. So adults are higher vaccinated. The 12 to 18 group is higher vaccinated, but 5 to 12-year-olds were the last to be able to be vaccinated. And by then, we know that many people had COVID fatigue, did not get their children vaccinated. We're thankful even today, the booster for 5 to 12-year-olds was approved for Pfizer, thankfully. So great things are happening, but children are still under-vaccinated. Huge factor. And last, the one thing I want to mention that I think is most critical is that children tend to be highly asymptomatic. So 40 to 60% of children will have an asymptomatic case of COVID, which means they will be in school and maybe not even know they're sick. So they could be pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic and spreading the disease to their peers without knowing and not feeling sick. And that makes testing especially important so that we can catch the virus early and keep those kids home just like we would if they felt sick. So just like we would before COVID, when a child had strep throat or had the flu and they knew they were sick because immediately they had symptoms, and we would keep them home so they didn't get other people sick. Here, we need a test to tell us they're sick in 40 to 60% of those children. So I think testing is really critical because then we can take those kids out and keep healthy kids in school and learning.
And I think we've seen that here in New York. So in New York State, for those of you who are I'll say, raise your hand if you have a school age child. I know many of us do. We have adopted a test to stay protocol. So in the beginning, I'm going to ask Megan this question. In the beginning, we were quarantining everybody, right? And if you want to just type in the chat whether your child was quarantined or not. So type in the chat, yes, my kid was. I know, my son was, and then he was old enough to receive a vaccine. He was 12. So we decided as a family that we were going to have him vaccinated, so then he didn't have to quarantine. But then moving forward, our Department of Health had adopted a test to stay rule, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But Megan, I'm going to put you on the spot in kind of transitioning from what Suzanne said to really schools, right? So what she said is right. What we saw here in New York is exactly that. That one of the reasons why our state adopted, masking was because children were generally asymptomatic. I know Dana probably saw this with your kindergarten students, right? There was no way you're distancing them, Dana, and they were little beautiful germ factories, right? Yeah. But generally young children were asymptomatic. Generally low transmission rate amongst young children. So at the height of COVID, off the top of my head, this was kind of my life for a long time, we had a 0.78% transmission rate. So less 1% transmission rate amongst high school students. When it got really bad here in New York, we had about a 0.59% transmission rate amongst elementary students. But again, that was amongst the students themselves. But the transmission rate from student to teacher or student to adult was much higher, right? And now, Megan, you are in a school building, right? Both a parent and an educator. Really, what did you see from the beginning of the pandemic to now, right? What changed? Distancing, masking, what did that look like?
So much has changed since September 2020 to May 17th, 2022. If I would be lying if parents, teachers, and kids alike were all very happy about going back to school in some way, shape, or form. We were all kind of scared about what that would look like because it didn't look at first like a typical school year. Distancing was the extreme 6 feet. In some classroom settings, speaking from the music teacher's perspective, I teach orchestra, but my band and general music and chorus colleagues had to distance 12 feet. Band instruments had to have their own masks. Gym had to distance 12 feet. Classrooms looked like straight rows all the time. Cleaning protocols, like almost every period, things would be cleaned because those were the protocols at the time. I know for a lot of our secondary buildings, and even in my area, some elementary buildings were teaching in either a fully virtual or a hybrid setting. So this way they could try to reduce the spread a bit. And then around this time last year, around May 2021, they started introducing in many districts in New York, more students back into the classroom where we reduced the distancing, but there was still masking, things like that. The beginning of this year didn't look much different from the end of last year. Still some distancing, but maybe not as much. We adopted more of the 3 feet distancing all across the board. Once our mask mandate was lifted in early March, at least I can say from both the teacher and parent perspective, distancing was kind of eliminated. The way that I explain it to my 8th graders in terms of masking is you do you, boo. And everyone's kind of accepted, yeah, these students will mask, and the majority of my students are not masking. The majority of my colleagues are not masking. A lot of the distancing in cafeterias and a lot of the plastic barriers that were put in place were quickly dismantled. So right now, it looks a lot more typical than it did even a few weeks ago, which is very encouraging for sure. So I'm trying to think. Normal concerts are back again with similar you do you, boo. There's no other way I can describe it. Masking rules. A lot of community events or like sporting events or musical events, still had limitations with distancing early on in the school year. Those are gone now. So we're definitely headed in the right direction, with the caveat that I want to say over the past week and a half, I have been seeing the quarantines start to tick up a little bit, but those quarantines are more for kids who actually have tested positive more than the blanket quarantines. We still do get those, those emails, both as parents and as teachers saying that there was a person in your classroom or in your building who contracted COVID. Here are the typical protocols, sort of things. But in reality, nothing really changes much when you get those. You just kind of have to keep it in the back of your mind. Although I do have some colleagues who have told me, getting closer to the end of the year, thinking about family events that they have in late June, early July, weddings, that they for themselves personally are going to start masking again because they just don't want to cancel a wedding or don't want to put an elderly family member in that situation because speaking to the elementary students are asymptomatic. My whole family had COVID early on in December 2020. My two children were asymptomatic. So my whole family was quarantined. This was my classroom for 2.5 weeks, my basement here. Then 2 weeks later, both my husband and I got it, and pretty bad cases, although mine was milder compared to his. He was hospitalized for a couple of days. So we got hit pretty hard. So, but that's kind of what it looks like now. It's looking a lot more typical, which is a refreshing change.
And I think that really is a great change. And that brings me really to, where we are, with why are we doing this, I guess. So, we're trying as much as we can to give our kids in our New York schools and across the country some sense of normalcy. We've talked about academic learning loss. We don't like using that. We say academic recovery, right? We want to talk about recovering, what they've lost. We want to give them back the extracurriculars and the music and the arts. And as my son's a saxophone player, as Megan, we want to make sure that our horn players don't have to be distanced and have bell covers. And we want to bring sports back and, have PTAs back in school buildings. And Suzanne, I'm going to put you on the spot again. And to do that, again, it comes sometimes down to testing and distancing and masking and safety. I'm vaccinated, Dana's vaccinated. New York has high vaccine rates. So again, if we're all vaccinated, New York has got super high vaccine rates. We have across the country, our 5 to 12 has the highest vaccine rates of all of the states as well. So we're and again, New York State PTA's position on vaccine, I want to be very clear, is that is a parent choice. And we want you just to make an informed decision. This means that going to talk to your pediatrician, having a conversation about vaccine with your pediatrician, and then having it around your kitchen table and you deciding whether or not that's right for your family. So for some families it is right, for some families it may not be right, but that decision your family is going to make. Our family had that conversation around our kitchen table. We included our son, who is not going to be 13 soon, I can't even believe it, and said, how do you feel about this? And he said, I want to be vaccinated. So he received the COVID vaccine. He's about to get a booster as well. But again, we're vaccinated here in New York, so why do we have to keep testing?
We have to keep testing for all of the reasons we've already discussed. Even those of us here who are vaccinated and boosted are getting COVID now, right? So as new strains of the virus are mutating and becoming more viable out in the world, I think that the vaccine efficacy is becoming lower and lower, and we know no vaccine is 100% efficacious from the start. And the vaccines we have today are even less efficacious against the new strains. And so I think we're perfect examples of that here on the call. Also, as time goes on, your vaccine efficacy wanes. So the further you get from the point of time when you were vaccinated, it's less efficacious as well. And So these are all really important things, even though we may have really high vaccine rates or natural immunity, if we even talk about natural immunity, because we know a very high percentage of children have been infected with COVID at this point in the pandemic, especially with the Omicron surge around Christmas time and in January. We know that both of those types of immunity, whether it's through vaccination or through natural immunity, they both wane. And testing helps us, especially PCR testing. We're going to talk a little bit about the differences, I think, of antigen and PCR testing, but PCR testing allows us to catch the virus very, very early because of the sensitivity of the test before the child is even infectious. And so that's what makes it so important, is that, again, you can decide, we know this child has the virus and needs to stay home before they infect other children, and then you have to quarantine the whole classroom. So this is really important to keeping our classrooms open and the healthy children in school and learning.
And Suzanne, I'm going to go out of order. I know we wanted to talk, I want to talk a little bit later about antigen and PCR, but let's talk about it now. So, you know, New York State, and I'll talk a little bit about New York State. So New York State has a test to stay strategy. And I know for those of us with children in school buildings, we know what this means now. So before we would have our students quarantine for a certain number of days, and then they could come back. And then we realized that students were learning so much instruction. And really, you know, we had a fantastic last week social emotional learning and mental health conversation that, you know, honestly, the pandemic was greatly, significantly negatively affecting our students' mental health in 1,000 ways. So the state and the CDC and everyone really had to say, how do we fix this? So test to stay happens. Test to stay, for those of you who may not be aware, is a new type of system where a student tests certain days during their exposure period, but they're able to come to school still. So for instance, you have to test, as example, on the first day, on the third day, on the fifth day, while you're maybe wearing a mask during that exposure period. But the child is being able to stay in a school building setting. They don't have to quarantine at home if they're unvaccinated. Now, if you're a vaccinated child, you don't really have to test to stay. Often, however, families and schools are testing students even if they're vaccinated, because, you know, there's new strains like the one that got Dana, even though she was, you know, quadruple shot. So the ones we're doing here in New York are generally antigen tests, right? So that's your at-home test. You know, you get the box sent home by the school district. It's your at-home COVID test. You do the nose swab. I think everyone's done 1,000 nose swabs at this point. Nose swab. You put the swab in the water. You twist. You put the cap on. You do the drop, 3 drops. You wait 15 minutes and you read it. And then you see 1 line, yay, 1 line, boo, 2 lines, right? That's your antigen test. Generally, I think I pretty summed up that well. I don't think there's anybody who hasn't done an antigen COVID test now. But tell us the difference between, because you know what, I didn't really know this when COVID first came on. You know, if I asked my husband the difference, he would look at me and be like, what are you talking about? So let's talk a little bit about the difference between an antigen, what we generally do now at home, and a PCR test, why one is a little bit more reliable and why one can detect COVID sooner than others.
Yes. So both great tests. We should start off by saying that, and both great at detecting COVID, but really at different times in your infection period and at different times of when the virus is replicating in your body. So different times when you should really use them. I think when you're talking about asymptomatic testing, so testing in a population of students or even adults that you don't know if they're infectious, you're just testing to take a barometer of who is sick and who is healthy, so you know what's happening in your population. PCR is absolutely what you want to do. PCR is able to detect, because of the level of sensitivity and something we call limit of detection, and I'll explain quickly what that means, but it is able to detect the virus when there's very low level of virus in the nose. So you remember, PCR is a very similar process to antigen. So again, swabbing in the nose, but then it will go into a tube and go off to a lab to be processed by a diagnostics lab group. And the level of limit of detection there is very, very low. So all that's required is very minimal amount of virus to be replicating in your body for the PCR to pick it up. So this is very early in your infection. Now, this means that the individual that's infected is not infectious yet. So we're able to identify those people, those individuals, before they're able to spread the virus to others, which makes PCR an ideal option for asymptomatic testing. Now, antigen, on the other hand, so if I am sick or Dana is sick, and maybe the first day I have a little scratchy throat and I take an antigen test and I test negative and I say, oh, geez, maybe I don't have COVID, maybe I just have allergies. And this happens very commonly. I'm sure there's plenty of people on this call that this has happened to. This happened to me. This maybe happened to Dana. I see her smiling a little bit. Maybe this happened to her as well. I tested negative my first day of COVID. I tested positive on PCR. I didn't test positive on rapid antigen until day 3 of my infection. And that's because I did not have enough of the virus replicating in my body for rapid antigen to be able to detect it. Now, could I have been infectious during that period? Maybe, maybe not. But the rapid antigen wasn't able to detect it. Rapid antigen is a great test to be able to take at home at a low cost to know when you are infectious and not able to leave the house because you may spread to somebody else. So it is a great test for that use case, but not for an asymptomatic population where you want to identify people early and pull them out of the population before they can infect others. By the time you're testing positive on a rapid antigen test, you are already infectious. Oh, you're on mute, Kyle. Kyle, mute.
The whole Zoom, of course I'm mute while I'm talking. We've been doing Zoom for 2 years, but that still happens. Dana, I'm going to toss things to you because I know you and I recently had this question about testing. So Dana.
Yeah, so, just to speak from the experience that I've had, on Mother's Day, I was with my family and felt fine. Then the next day, I had a tickle in my throat, like a postnasal drip. But again, I thought it was allergies. We were outside, we were gardening. So just on a whim, because I have all these free tests now in my house, Monday, I took a test and it was negative. So, okay, great. I spent the day then with my daughter, who took the day off so that she would have an extra day with me. She doesn't live at home. And we were in the car and we went to the outlets and, we had a great day, but I still had that drip in my throat. So on a whim, I took a test and it was negative. The next day I took a test and it was positive. So now, of course, everybody is, nervous because we had been together, but my entire family never got sick. We're testing all the time. I don't have as many of those tests in my house anymore because we've been using them. But what happened is I tested positive and then I went to my doctor and he said that home tests, whenever you test positive, the PCR will come back positive because they're so sensitive and they test for more of the protein or whatever it is they're testing for. They test at a higher rate than the PCR tests. So okay, so I was positive, and again, everybody's positive. I guess my question is, since they're so great at detecting COVID, 2 things. First of all, I'm still testing positive, and today is day 9, but I haven't had any symptoms or felt sick since day 5. So number 1, how infectious am I? Because now in New York State, you have to stay home for 5 days. And then you can go out and wear an N95 for 5 days. I have gone out a couple of times, but I'm still holding up in my own room because I don't want to get anybody sick. So that's my question. How long before I feel like I'm COVID free, even though I'm still testing positive? And number 2, how come if the rapid home tests are so accurate, why can't, like my son, he couldn't return to his program until he had a PCR test?
So if you are still testing positive on rapid antigen, you are likely still infectious and you should not. And you're doing the right thing, staying home. If you do leave, absolutely wear an N95 and only do it if you have to, because you still have a high level of virus in your body. At least, you're detecting that the rapid antigen is detecting that on your swab from your nose. And that's the limit of detection in rapid antigen is very high. And so you have to have a lot of virus replicating in your body for it to be a positive. So the fact that you're still testing positive is not uncommon. Over 50% of people test positive past day 5. And so the CDC guidelines are day 5. You can, if you're not symptomatic, you don't have a fever, you can wear an N95 and leave your house or go back to work if you're a healthcare worker. But if you are still testing positive, you are likely infectious.
So
Absolutely.
if I test negative tomorrow, does that mean I'm done?
That means you are likely no longer infectious, yes.
Okay, so anyone here from Nassau region, if I don't show up to spring conference tomorrow, it's because I'm still positive. So keep your fingers crossed I'm negative, and I'll see you tomorrow night.
I know, it's so disappointing. Dana's had to miss both Suffolk region conference and maybe Nassau region
Yeah,
conference.
I hope not. Keep
I
your
know,
fingers
I
crossed,
know,
my
it's so
friends.
disappointing. But I think that's one of the good things that we've seen. And I want to talk to Megan about that a little bit again, as an educator in a school building. And Dana, I know you've seen this with your school district, is that because, you're, symptom free right now, really, you're feeling normal, you think you're fine, right? When I had COVID back in November 2020, I had a snuffly nose. I think we were all on a call maybe for 1 or 2 nights, but that was it. And so back then the Department of Health was like, oh, you don't have it. No, it was a false positive. So I took 4 PCR COVID tests, 4 tests, and they all said positive, 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 positive. And finally, my local Department of Health, because I was not normal then, because back then everybody was getting sick with COVID, right? If you were positive, you had symptoms. I was just, an asymptomatic positive. And so they tell me, oh, no, it's a false negative. But I think now we're seeing, as this strange shift, we're seeing that happen. So Megan, let's talk about that. You are in a school building. Has your school started to talk about what's happening now? What's fall going to look like? I mean, are we starting to have these conversations yet, or is it too soon?
Yes and no. I know it, like, again, my experience as a special area educator, where we had like music, art, theater departments plan their years like a year in advance. I think many districts have learned their lessons with trying to plan things that far in advance. I have not seen a concert and theater production calendar for 22-23 yet, which is very unusual at this point of the year. Usually I've seen a draft at least 2-3 weeks ago at this point. Haven't seen it. I think there are talks, but I know they're kind of using this year as a cautionary tale of sorts, because we saw a lot of things just shut down completely in December, January, February. And again, I go back to when the mask mandate was lifted here in New York. It was like the floodgates open and just this big rush to get everything back that was canceled on the plate. So it's making April, May, and even into June feel a whole lot more busy than normal. Definitely from the teacher perspective, from the parent perspective too. I'm not just a state leader. I also help to lead some of my kids units as well. And I'm definitely seeing a lot of the events that we had originally tentatively planned with the district to do in like January. Now we're scrambling to find dates with proms and APs and regents exams and other field days and the like. They have, but they really haven't set anything in stone. I almost feel like districts just want to get through today. For those of you not from New York, this is our big statewide budget and Board of Education seat voting day. If you're from New York and you haven't voted, as soon as you get off of this, run to your school. Shameless plug. So I think a lot of districts are also waiting for that. And I think they're also kind of waiting for what happens over the summer, if anything comes down from the DOH or NICED as well in terms of any changes. I don't see any changes happening in the classroom that look any different from right now. I think it's the event planning that's going to look a lot different. Like, a lot of districts are going to look to shift when they do certain events that have traditionally happened, especially in those winter months.
And I think you're right. I think we're starting to see now, it's nice because we're outside. And during the height of COVID, we saw a lot of our school districts having outdoor classrooms and trying to get kids outside and being able to have mask breaks. And then we took, the state regulations tightened up a little bit, the CDC tightened up a little bit, and mask breaks went away in New York. And then, we fought very hard to bring those back. And that's one thing that's been very nice for New York State PTA advocacy. It's been very fluid. So we've been able to pivot and say, no, we're really not happy with that. We want mask breaks back. We want, and I saw ventilation, we're going to talk about ventilation. We want better ventilation in schools and more filtration. And we want more funding. And Suzanne, I want to put you on the spot about funding because we've been advocating for funding for schools. It's one of the things that we do all of the time. We advocate in both DC and we advocate in both New York for funding. We're really, really happy because we got it. We got a lot of it. So for the first time in the state, I've been working on school funding since 1998. So for 24 years, we received full foundation aid funding for our schools on state funding. So yay. It was like a huge win. It's just so fantastic. I know we'll do the happy dance, right? But at the same time, national PTA has really been so hard at work with, their state affiliates, us and other states around the country, working on, the American Rescue Funds and COVID resources. And so talk to a little bit about that, what that looks like, because school districts have funding for COVID and to keep schools open. And, these are the conversations we should be having with our school leaders. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I have to come off mute. Yes. So in March of last year, the Biden administration released around $10 billion in funding for COVID relief. And that was dedicated specifically to support testing, COVID-19 testing in schools. It was under the umbrella of HHS and the CDC in something called the ELC funding package. And that's the Epidemiology and Laboratory Capacity Fund. And this was for the entire United States. Much of that funding has gone unused, unfortunately. I'm so happy to hear that New York State has taken advantage of that funding. As the largest manufacturer of COVID-19 testing in the world, we have been a part of educating and helping many of the districts across the United States to implement these programs and to work with our laboratory partners as well to implement. But we've struggled with opt-in rates as well because this is truly a partnership. Even if the district decides to implement a program, we need the parents to opt their children in for testing in order for the program to work. And there are some communities where that just hasn't happened. And I will say that a lot of that funding has gone unused because the average opt-in rate around the US has hovered around 15%, which is abysmally low, I think, as everyone can probably agree on this call. And with that kind of opt-in rate, we just can't test enough children to keep COVID out of the schools, right? We can get a good idea of when a child is sick in a classroom and pull them out, but 15% just isn't enough to keep the whole school or the whole district safe. So that's led, especially in some of the larger school districts and some of the inner city school districts, to continued ongoing quarantines and shutdowns even this year, which we hoped wouldn't happen. So we have to push to keep this funding going.
Yeah, and I know that, we're so fortunate again for your partnership in this because, I know you're working on this. I know National PTA, Chris and her team and the GovRel team at National PTA working on this because these are the funds we need. We're so fortunate in Governor Hochul. I know Dana and I had a great call with them. We recently called Dan Fuller, who is a great partner, who is the governor's secretary for education. He was just at our convention, a proud card-carrying PTA member. He held up his PTA card there. It was funny. Mm-hmm. And I said, hey, Dan, we're going to be having all these great events around the state for schools. Can we have, some of our COVID tests? And he's like, how many do you need? He sent us 10,000 tests. So, they are so the National Guard showed up at our office in a big army truck and he dropped off boxes of tests for us to distribute. And I thank them so much. And that's what's happening around schools in New York, at least. So, they are, they're trying to fill orders, and we have a number of our school buildings, especially in our urban centers and our larger school districts, that are having a more comprehensive testing program. that are kind of school-based. And they're also offering testing centers in our schools. And that was very popular in the beginning of last school year when, we had really, really high COVID rates and we had low vaccination rates. I think that was very, very popular. And Dana, is this the kind of thing you're seeing, in your, going back to your school building, that's, kindergartners, lovely, wonderful, beautiful kindergartners, they are not distancing, sister, right?
No, Vanna.
And they're probably not great mask wearers at the height of COVID. And now we're not wearing masks optional. We're mask optional in our school, in our classrooms. So what does that look like being an educator of beautiful, wonderful young children?
So I'll tell you that it really was a lot of angst for me. It made me anxious because you're right. The masks were always below their nose. It didn't matter, especially some of them are so small and you just can't find some masks that are small enough for these tiny faces. And, I'm holding hands and I'm tying shoes and I go through a lot of hand sanitizer. And it's really kind of ironic that at one point I have 20 children in my class and 15 were home with COVID. And it just ran rampant through our school. And in fact, our school had the highest rate in the district. And because of that, we had different protocols that we had to go through from other schools in the district. But here, with wiping noses and pulling up masks and holding hands and all these kids who were sick, and I just sailed right through that. And now I go to a teachers union dinner to celebrate our retirees. And that's where I get exposed. And it turned out to be a super spreader. And there are, out of 250 people, there are like 25 people with COVID. So, I didn't get it from the children. I got it from my fellow teachers, which is really just, crazy. But we just did the best that we could. We would remind them about personal space. That's what I kept saying. I always said personal space because all these other terms, you don't want to scare them. They're growing up in the middle of this terrible pandemic and they shouldn't be afraid to be near a friend. So I always said, we need more personal space, things like that. And when we're outside and they want to play together. So, you supposedly when you're outside, it's safer. And so we let them play together. We would have 80 kids on the playground. There's no way to have them all socially distanced. At lunch, they were all socially, and I keep saying were because just as a little side note, I'm on a medical leave right now for the last 8 weeks. I had spine surgery. So I'm assuming they're doing the same things that we have been doing all year. But now there's no masks. I visited before I got sick. There are no more masks. See all their beautiful little faces was really amazing, but they're on top of each other. And then, now we're having another onslaught of COVID. For me, I worry about everything. I'm really very cautious. And the fact that I got it really just is a surprise to me. But in schools, it's just impossible. That's the bottom line. That's what I guess, make a long story longer, right? That's what I tend to do. But it's impossible. It really is. They want to hold hands. They want to play. They are little and they just want to be with their friends and they're leaning over each other. They're standing next to one another at their tables and they're inching closer and closer. It's just the nature of small children. And then the older kids, they just don't want anything to do with it. So it was very impossible. And like I said, our school got hit very hard. But it is what it is. I mean, there was nothing we could do. We did the best we could, but with that in mind, we still had a lot of COVID cases.
And I think you're right. I think when you texted me that you had COVID, I was shocked because you had just had your booster a few weeks previous and you were symptomatic with your booster. So I knew it was working because you got sick. And I was like, no, you just had your booster. Like, you don't have COVID. Like, you just had your booster. Right. And I said to my husband, Dana has COVID. Dana's like, no. Or my Doug's like, no, Dana had her booster. I'm like, I'm telling you, Dana's have COVID. So it just kind of proved to me that testing still has to be really a part of our strategy to really mitigate this virus. And I want to get to questions. questions. So we have about 10 minutes left. So I'm going to ask Susan Fisher, our great legislation coordinator, to come on camera. She's been collecting questions for us, and I'm going to turn things over to Susan as moderator. And she is going to kind of ask questions of our panel. Susan?
Hi, everyone. Sorry about my voice. So we've had a lot, like Kyle said, there's been a lot of information, and New York State PTA has done a really wonderful job of trying to make sure that the parents are on top of all of the guidance and the changing rules. And there's been rules about like the CDC's 5 days that Dana mentioned before. Is there a reason that we're not requiring people to test negative to come back to school, and we're just why are we still allowing that?
Yeah, well, I'll say the New York perspective, and I know Suzanne maybe have some information. You can test positive up to many months after your first positive test. So, and Suzanne, if you want to answer this too, so you can continue to test positive. So, but your viral load may be so low that you're no longer a transmitter, but you can still have a small viral load in your system. And CDC, we're following their guidance that really says, again, in that certain period after so many days after you're positive, that it is safe for you to come back because your viral load is so low that you are no longer a transmitter. Suzanne, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I want you to chime in.
You got it almost perfect, Kyle. So you generally will, and I know there was a question about this in the chat too from Kate. So you generally will not test positive on rapid antigen for any longer than 10 days. It is highly unlikely to test positive on rapid antigen. Again, that's only going to pick up when you're infectious. However, on PCR, because of the sensitivity and because it can pick up fragment RNA long after the virus is dead, it can pick that up for up to 90 days or longer after you've been infected. And, we know this is a phenomenon that is something that happens. So what we often do with people who test positive after they've been infected, we do a rapid test as a reflex, what we call a reflex test, to make sure they're not infectious. So that's the best way to check for a person who is infectious. You really will not generally test positive on a rapid antigen test if you are not infectious.
And that's great to know, Suzanne. So that's a great guide. So that PCR gives you that 90-day positive generally. Is that the frame?
Not always. It won't always do that, but with some individuals it does. So there are some cases that it won't. Some people will test negative on PCR after 10 days as well because they've cleared the virus.
Okay.
But some people just happen to hold on to it in their body for longer periods of time.
Yeah, I had a girlfriend that tested positive for 60 days. So, it was a full 2 months.
Wow. It happens. It really does happen.
Yeah, great question. Thanks for that clarity on the difference between a PCR positive and an antigen positive.
Yeah.
Susan?
So another question we got was, and maybe for those of us who don't know a lot about it, can you tell us a little bit about what natural immunity is? And is there any talk about natural immunity in kids or research being done on natural immunity and where we're heading in that direction?
I don't have information on that. So that is not a question for me. Suzanne, do you have any info on that?
It's not something I could really address, but we do know that the rates of children that have been infected are estimated to be up to about 75% in the United States at this point in the pandemic, which is mind-boggling to me. So we know there are many children that do have some form of natural immunity. There's many studies that have been done at this point in the pandemic on natural immunity, and we know that it does not last forever. So it does wane, just like the vaccine, and it wanes even faster. So most estimates and data that we've seen is roughly 90 days is the estimate for natural immunity.
Yeah, it was funny. After
hybrid immunity is the best.
I was going to say, after my positive, I went to get an antibodies test, and I was like, oh, I wonder how long they're going to last. And mine lasted like 4 months, and then they were gone. So
yes. Yes. And there's many people who have had COVID more than once who can testify to that fact, right? Especially with multiple strains, and there's so many variations on the surface of the protein. It's just, it's so variable that it's likely that you could get it again. So natural immunity is not something to bank on. Hybrid immunity is, of course, the best protection, where you have been vaccinated and then also been infected. However, it's not something you want to go out and proactively do. But all of the studies point to that being your best protection.
Susan?
All right, so our next question, I think, is more for Megan, Dana, and Kyle. We're going into a really high stakes testing time. The Regents is right around the corner, IB, AP exams. So how can we advocate for our kids who need to keep up with their work or need to take these tests? If they get sick with COVID and have to quarantine, what happens to those kids, and how can we advocate to make sure that they are still given the same, opportunities as, the kids who are in school?
I will take this one. I know in both my home and work districts, they've incorporated a lot of the kids who are quarantined and lumped them into the homebound instruction category, where after school hours, we have teachers who can Zoom or Google Meet in. They have set hours for, I'm in a 7-8 building, so 7th grade math is Mondays at 3:30, and they've been continuing that because we have kids on homebound instruction for any reason, more so this year. So I think you may not necessarily be getting the instruction live during 5th period as your child normally would for, say, trigonometry, but you can certainly advocate for your quarantine child, especially those getting ready for finals and regents, and I know IB exams are still ongoing, for your child to get some sort of homebound tutoring or reach out directly to those teachers of those classes that you're most concerned about in terms of those high stakes tests and say, my child is quarantined. Can we work something out? And I don't know a single educator who would say no to that.
And I think, on Friday, we are going to send a message to all of our members with a new change to our state regents that we really worked on for a long time. We didn't get everything we wanted. I'm going to say that. We had asked for last year's regents, but we did get some adjustments. We're going to send that out on Friday. The regents actually just released that today in a parent email, so many of you should have gotten that today. That allows, instead of a 65 passage rate on regents exams, a 50 passage rate for the students that have passed the underlying course. So we're going to send more information out on that. It was a reflection, I think, of many of our concerns on that issue, but we'll send more info on that too.
Yeah, and I will just pipe in and let you know that Kyle and I had a Zoom with Commissioner Rosa late last week, and she basically said, let us read between the lines, and then she basically said that superintendents are going to be very lax, and that parents are not going to have to fight to appeal that. So, it is going to be a little bit of peace of mind for parents. Whether or not they should be taking them is another story, but, it will take a little bit of the anxiety out of the equation.
And then what about, was there any talk in any of that? Because I got that memo and it's wonderful news as far as I'm concerned, at least the first step. But what about kids who can't? It requires them sitting for the test, and if they're quarantining or are sick, they can't sit for the test. So what do we do for those kids? What's the procedure for them?
Yeah, so you'll trigger the homebound instruction procedures that each district has in place for those procedures. So, yeah, and that'll be on a case by case, district by district basis. Okay. Great question.
And then we had. So if you have an allergy or cold symptoms, all the symptoms that start with COVID, often sometimes, like me right now, I have a scratchy throat and a cough and runny nose. And of course, we're testing all the time. But how often should you be testing? And, how many times should you repeat it until you're certain that it's not COVID and it's just a regular cold or something else?
Suzanne?
That's a tough one. I think it's really what you're comfortable with. If you're not feeling well, I would stay home and test as frequently as you can. The government just released another 8 free tests to each individual household. So hopefully everybody is taking advantage of that on rapid antigen. If you haven't yet, please go ahead to the government website and order them. They'll be shipped to your house. And really test as frequently as you can if you're not feeling well, and stay home. I mean, everybody should stay home when they're not feeling well anyway. We always should have done that, and we never really did, right? We always pushed ourselves to do more and go to school and go to work. And I think COVID has forced us to take a step back and be more conscious of staying home when we're not feeling well. So if you're not feeling well, take a couple days, stay home and test yourself until you know you're safe.
So I'm just going to chime in very quickly. I did see yesterday that we can get the additional 8 free tests. I actually even shared the link on Facebook for anyone I'm friends with so that they can get the free test also. And then my confirmation email to tell me that, my order is being processed stated that if this was my second or my first, that I could go ahead and order more. So if this was only the first time that you tried to order them, you're actually eligible to go back and have, 1 or 2 more orders so that you have all 3 orders. But this week also, my husband was filling a script for me at the pharmacy, and everyone on our insurance plan was eligible through our insurance company at Costco Pharmacy to get a 5-pack for free. So in addition to all those that I got in the mail, I now have 3 5-packs because my insurance covered them. So I would also suggest going to your pharmacy with your insurance card and see if you can get them from your insurance company as well.
That's a good idea. I know our library gave us free ones when I brought my little guy in to get a library card. In the welcome paperwork and packaging was a free set of tests.
I still remember Susan and her boys had COVID the very first week that
March
the world
21st,
shut down.
2020 was when we started showing symptoms.
We were all together in Washington, D.C. and like 2 days later, she came down with her boys with COVID. And that was one of the scariest things because in the very beginning, COVID, not that it's not scary now, I'm not minimizing anything about COVID, but nobody knew enough about it. The hospitalizations were sky high. And, thankfully they're all doing well. But, who would have thought all these years later, we'd still be doing this.
And 2 years later, almost on the anniversary, my husband got it.
Oh boy.
Yep. Isn't that the way it works?
Like I've been personally testing like every single day over the past week and a half because my allergies have just been on fire. Like if you're on Long Island, you saw those puddles of yellow last night into today. And you can only imagine what a middle school where half the people are suffering from allergies maybe sounds like today. But now that we're being exposed and doing more, I've been finding myself testing almost every day because you never know. The way that my children got COVID was through a babysitter who called us on Black Friday 2020 and said, guess what? Me and my fiance have it. And the pediatrician didn't even want to test them because they weren't showing symptoms. But I said, no, you need to test them. Pediatrician called on December 1st, shocked. I got a call from the Department of Health during a 5th period class and had to leave school that very moment. So like you never know. It's still out there.
Mm-hmm. Great. I think we have time for one more question, right? So what is the PTA advocating for in terms of ventilation and filtration? I know Kyle said that we would get to this. So for places specifically where kids have been unmasked, like the cafeteria, classrooms when they're having snack, maybe the nurse's office that sees both high-risk kids and kids who come for some sort of symptom or cold. And, the school office, right, has a lot of visitors, especially now the buildings are opening up to parents coming in and speakers coming in. So what are the PTA positions and what are we advocating for in terms of ventilation?
And now we're unmasked everywhere and we're mask optional. I shouldn't say that. So many students are still wearing masks, many teachers and educators are wearing masks, but it's mask optional in schools. So SED and the Department of Health actually put out new ventilation guidelines at the beginning of last school year. And I believe they are on our COVID-19 webpage. If you go to nyspta.org, look, I'm doing it in my hand in the top left page, you can see our COVID-19 page, and those guidelines are there. And we'll make sure to share them in the follow-up to this conversation too. There are new guidelines on best practices on ventilation. There's a lot of technology and product out there that is really not what the Department of Health and SED and the school building facilities are looking to do right now. So that's really, really important. But we'll share that. We continue to work on that. It's actually a policy position that we have about healthy, clean indoor air. So if you go to Where We Stand, you can actually read all of our policy positions on that. But know that we continue to work with the Department of Health and SED to try to figure out what are the best ventilation guidelines they have. They did update those again for this school year. It's my understanding that they are going to revisit them again for this coming school year based on knowing what we have. The good news, again, is that they're very low transmission rates, again, still in our school buildings, even know that now that we are fully unmasked. So that's positive. And I know we are over time, so I apologize for so many staying on, but I have one last question myself that I want to toss out there, and then we are going to end this. So hold on. So I've been reflecting on the chat, and it's been fantastic. It's been really conversational. I think that's so important. Okay, so it's been an hour and 10 minutes, but what do we do from here, and where do we go? And I want you each to kind of say, well, what are we going to do with the information we heard tonight, right? From a PTA perspective, from a school perspective, where do we go from here? Suzanne, what do you think? What do we do as a leader? What do we do as a parent caregiver? What do we do as an educator? What's next?
I think we need to partner together as a group and continue to advocate for our children to make sure that we are again identifying the sick children, keeping them home, and keeping our healthy children in school, whatever that looks like, whether it's masked, unmasked, hopefully more ventilation. The more ventilation, the better. And back doing the things they want to do, learning, spending time with friends, and not suffering from all they've been through over the past 2 years, both socially, emotionally, mentally, and productivity wise from an education perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's fantastic. And we're going to wrap up, but I want to ask Megan. Megan, where do we go from here?
I would agree wholeheartedly with the advocacy for more ventilation. I would even up the ante a little bit. Air conditioning. We desperately need air conditioning.
We have a new resolution on that about maximum heat temperatures.
Exactly. I think because if you saw some of the makeshift ventilation that we've been trying in our classrooms, leaving windows open when it's 30 degrees outside is
going in one way, out the other way.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely continue the advocacy for increased funding for academic intervention services, for special education, for continue advocating for the return of some programs that may be seen as extras. Again, a personal plea, affects me personally. And just continue to work together with your schools, with your teachers, to advocate for our kids, as we always do.
And Dana, I'm going to ask you to give us what your Madam Presidential thoughts are.
Well, I would just say that we all have to be responsible. We have to act responsibly. We have to think responsibly. So do I want to wear a mask everywhere I go? Absolutely not. My face melts, I have a great tan now because I've been sitting in my backyard alone, easy to social distance back there. But if I put a mask on, you won't see it. But all kidding aside, I just think we have to really think about the health and safety of our own families and of the people around us. So if you're not feeling well, as Suzanne said, stay home. If you think it's a cold or allergies, and we have this abundance of free tests now available to us, take a test. That's what I did. I really was on a lark. I never expected it to come back positive. I never once ran a fever. So everywhere you go, they take your temperature. And that's supposed to, be an indicator whether or not you have COVID. I never ran a fever once. So I just think that you have to think about the people around you. I am not advocating for masks to come back. I'm all about parent choice. We have been parent choice from day one, but we would say when it's safe to do so. And we got a lot of flack from that. What does that mean? Well, if the COVID rates are 12% and we want to keep everyone safe and healthy, wearing a mask may be the best thing because it may not be safe to take them off. Where we're at now without masks, I would not be advocating for them to return, but I would always continue for parent choice. So if you feel that you're concerned, put a mask on your child. When masks first went away, a couple of months ago, I have a class of 20 and a third of them continued to wear masks. I actually continue wearing my mask as well because I was having surgery a few weeks after that. And there were people in my building saying, why are you still wearing a mask? Well, I was concerned about myself, and that's a personal choice. And, you know, I could do what I want to do. But I just think that's really important to think, just to think about it. You know, don't go to a restaurant if you're not feeling great, because that's a place that everybody is unmasked, right? Because we're all eating. Just be safe, be cognizant of what's going on around you, and stay healthy. That's the most important thing. You know, have a wonderful summer. Thank you to everybody for joining us. My thanks to Suzanne for joining us and sharing her knowledge with us. And I don't know if Chris is still here, Chris Pravat. She is from National PTA. She really works hand in hand with us with a lot of things that we do. And so she is, you know, the very special person that helped us partner with Thermo Fisher. And we thank her for all that she does for New York State PTA, and Suzanne for bringing all this to our state. We thank you. I know you've done some webinars in other states as well. And we are going to put this out on our website because it's been recorded. We're also going to email it to our members, and such great information. So, you know, I thank everyone here tonight for joining us, and we'll continue to provide the very best, most relevant, newest information that we can. So check out our website, and whenever there's something really important to share, we put together a webinar. So keep tuning in, and stay healthy, and I will be back out there soon enough. And if I have to wear a mask, I'll wear my mask. I'm going to protect all of you. So anyway, thanks again for joining us, everybody. Have a great night.
Everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a great
Thank
night.
you, everyone. Have a good night.
Take care.
Thanks.